What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Adrian Lowe. Talk about my May reading wrap up. I'm Adrian Lowe. I read professionally and for pleasure. And if you like those types of things and that type of content, find me here to stay connected. Now back to the video. In the month of May, I did not read as much as I would have liked to book-wise, but I did read two books and a short story, I guess. I read Tina Turner's second autobiography, My Love Story, and I read Toni Morrison's second work dealing with slavery, A Mercy. And I also read Recitative by Toni Morrison, but I was deep in my Substack bag. So I have a whole list of my content that I consumed during the month of May. So let's talk about some Substack articles that I read. So I read one called Toni Morrison is Difficult to Read, which talked about the purpose and understanding of why Toni Morrison writes her books in the way that she did, and a better understanding of how to get through her books. Also read The Dismantling of Black Studies, which focused on the ways in which Black Studies are being, Black Studies programs are being torn apart and disrupted in America in this current political climate. I read The Broken Promise, which was about Reconstruction and its failure to properly implement it and the consequences of that and how it affects the world today. I read 1876, the final battle of the Civil War, which was about the president's failure to keep the Union Army in the Southern United States after Reconstruction and removing them as a sort of capitulation to Southern autocracy and the rise of Jim Crow in America. Also read You Won't Share Power, But You're Lazy, Inconsistent, and Selfish, which talks about an organizer and a woman's experience in trying to develop a strategy for shared power and the struggles that comes with it. I read Is Community the Nearest Side Hustle? SCOTUS Drops the Other Shoe on the VRA. Let's jump right in. So let's start with the books. A Mercy was my third Toni Morrison read. I also have read, since I read A Mercy, I read Recitative as well, like I said, and I'm currently reading Playing in the Dark. It is a part of my May reads. I'll talk about these at the end of the video though, but Mercy was really good. I don't think it was better than Beloved, but I do think it was good. I also think this is one of Toni's easier works. A Mercy focuses on this kind of a family of sorts, right? So you have the beginning of America, 1680s, before the country's even found. A slave trade is still very, very new to the Americas and to the Caribbean islands. And it focuses on Jacob, who is an Anglo-Dutch slave trader who has a small holding in the north, comes to the northern United States. He seems to have a disdain or a disliking for slavery itself, but he takes a small slave girl in form of payment from someone who owes him a debt from a plantation owner who is Catholic. Her name is Florence, who a Native American woman that lives with Jacob and his wife says has the feet of a Portuguese lady and the hands of a slave. Right? Florence looks for love pretty much from everybody in her life, from Lena, who is the older servant to the white people in the story, and then also from a blacksmith who was an African that was never enslaved, that was a free person. Right? And so the voices in the story are Lena, Rebecca, which is the wife of Jacob, Sorrow, who is I think Sorrow is also, he writes to her that she may be black, but she may be white also. And then we have the voice of Florence's mother as well. And all these stories kind of talk about, this book entirely talks about rather, how all these things come together and the story of really abandonment, just love and mercy, right? I thought this book was really good in describing the way in which the country kind of came to create racism. I thought Toni did a good job of talking about and setting up and framing that in a way that showed how, like, there were two indentured white servants in this book as well who were a gay couple, but there was this moment where they developed like a hatred for the blacksmith, the free black man, and it's where they saw he got paid for the work that he did while they're working together. Up until that moment, they described themselves as happy and enjoying the work they did together. But when they got to that point, there was a shift in the feeling. And the fact that he called, from that point on, every day forward, the black free tradesmith called the white men Mr. as a point of reverence, and as also, I would assume, a point of self-protection. But it made him feel better because he called him Mr. Even if he felt like he didn't know if he was joking or serious and calling him Mr. It made him feel better because it gave him a differentiation of status, even though the white indentured servant was closer to being a slave than the free blacksmith ever was. The fact that he called him Mr. and gave him a higher level of respect made him feel more comfortable being around him. And that just kind of shows the nature of relationship of like race in the book, but it also is a book about like great pain and hurt. I think the book kind of, in the earlier chapters before Jacob, the main character, he dies in the book. Before he dies, all of the other characters kind of rally around supporting Jacob and supporting the homestead. And then when Jacob dies, the family the family of sorts kind of falls apart, and it becomes more so about them like finding their own independent survival. And Rebecca, who was on her way to death, is healed by the African. She becomes very cold to all of them and treats them with indifference as she tries to find herself through the church and fit into the community. And all of them just kind of fall into shells of themselves. And it's a really interesting story about like that, and just like the formations of the social political patterns that have created and been ingrained in America to date. And I think it's a really good read. So if you haven't read this, A Mercy by Toni Morrison, be sure to check this one out. Next, I read My Love Story by Tina Turner. And this was a good read. I will say, I think a lot of this book has already been published and already been talked about in either like other documentaries and or things that Tina have put out before. I think all the new information in this story really kind of started after chapter 8, and the book's only 12 chapters, right? So there are some parts that I thought were really good. I think, like I said in another video, this story was really about Tina Turner's lack of love from her mom. Like, it's called My Love Story, but I really do feel like the impact of her mom leaving her had such a profound effect on all parts of her life. She never really healed from that wound. Like, she just talks about it so much, and so sadly in the book. There's a portion in the book where she kind of talks about her mothering and what that was like, and she kind of hints to the fact that she was not necessarily like the best mom, and that because of the traveling and because when she really was able to take control of her own life, her children were older, they were grown. And so at that point, she didn't feel like there was much that she could do for them. She also had a lot of contention, I guess, with the other two children, the children of Ike that she kind of raised. She had issues with them too. And so, but yeah, there was just a lot of sadness. And I think when I remember watching her documentary in 2021, when she's like, I didn't live a good life. I think that's what she said in that video. And she also described a relationship with her mom. I'll see if I can put those clips in without getting a copyright flag. But yeah, it was just really sad. It was a really sad book, especially the later part of her life. But I'm glad that she found someone like Irving who loved her so much that he gave her a kidney so that she could continue to live. And he also just sincerely and like deeply chose her. And I think that she was happy and blessed to find that. And also, I did think it was interesting that out of like the longing and hurt that she had from her mother's relationship, she still like desired it. Like, cause when she found out she had colon cancer, she had failing kidneys and all of that stuff. Colon cancer, failing kidneys, she had a stroke and a bunch of other stuff. She said when it was talking about getting a kidney transplant, she says, the toxins in my body had started taking over. I couldn't eat. I had pebbles all over my stomach. And she said, I was surviving but not living. I guess it was happening when you die. You diminish slowly and slowly and slowly. In Buddhism, death is acceptance. And once you live this long, there's not much more ahead. If my kidneys were going and it was time for me to die, I could accept that. I was a little bit tired, I would go join my mother and my sister, and that was okay. And I thought that was so interesting to the fact that, you know, she wrote so much about how hard her life was and how rough her relationship was with her mom. Still thought about her in death and wanted to go visit her or live with her after, and if she, you know, after she died. And she says about her mom here, she says, Ma, she calls her mom, Ma was Team Mike until my success was too big for her to ignore. That's when she really went on that Tina Turner trip, because more than anything, she loved being the mother of a celebrity. If we went out together, she had to sit at the front of the table so everyone could see she was with Tina. I wish she expressed that type of love for anime. When I tried to run away from Ike, Ma was the one who helped Ike find me. She always took his side. When Ike entered our lives, Ma viewed him as the sun, the moon, and the stars. In her mind, he was a celebrity, the mastermind behind whatever money we made, whatever success we achieved. Ma even maintained her relationship with Ike after we divorced. She still called him her in-law. I didn't want to hear any of the details, but I knew they stayed in touch. I brought her to my homes in England, France, and Switzerland to show her my world and invited her to view my success. None of it mattered to Ma. Somehow she still doubted that I was capable of achieving anything. Like, she writes about that. That is like, in the latter part of her life, she writes about that. And she just talks about how much of a wound it was. And she says, my mother passed in 1999. I was deeply affected by her death, in part because I mourned the relationship we should have had with each other, but never did. Yeah, she had a rough relationship, a rough go at it with her mom. And I think this book really did expose that, but that was like the only new information, and just her story with her new lover, Irving. But besides that, everything else was kind of run-of-the-mill, repeated information. Now let's get into some of the pieces online. The Dismantling the Black Studies. This piece's subtitle is "Everyone Committed to Democracy, Intellectual Freedom, and the Rule of Law Should Be Alarmed at What is Happening and Be Prepared to Act." So this is something I'm familiar with as well, but there's just a general attack on the preservation of Black studies programs across the country. And this article talks about how some of these institutions in the South, like University of Texas, University of Florida, in the North, like Columbia and NYU, and Kentucky, in the Midwest, or the South as well, rather, how these places are kind of attacking Black intellectual studies, the programs that currently exist, and shuttering their funding for these programs, and just really not seeing an investment or a need to continue investing in these programs, and this alarming rate of it. And I think that, like I said in another video, it's the president's kind of initiative to focus on and attack anything that is deemed diversity, equity, inclusion. And Black spots, Black education, and Black history has been at the center of those types of attacks. And so now we're seeing this unparalleled, just kind of cutting of things that are deemed controversial or concerning, and anything that falls in that, which often includes Black studies, is being shuttered and taken away. The full article does a deep dive into some programs across the country that are seeing some of the impacts of it and what this means for Black studies. The link is in the description below, as well as all the links for the other articles I'll discuss. Please check it out and read it. It's something I think we all need to pay attention to and read, and be prepared to act on how we can save these programs. I also read this piece called "Toni Morrison is Too Difficult to Read," and I just really want to read the quote from the end, which I really, really enjoyed. And I thought that she did a great job of talking about and kind of summarizing the Toni Morrison experience. She says, "Yes, Toni Morrison's work is difficult, but that's kind of the point. To conclude, if you engage with novels by Toni Morrison, be sure to understand what you're signing up for. Don't expect to do some casual beach reading with these stories, because you'll be sorely disappointed. And also, don't be discouraged if you're left with more questions than answers by the end, or even during the reading process. I had to read Beloved twice before I was even able to feel situated with the text. If you read these novels outside of academia, resources for analysis and context can be inaccessible, which is extremely disheartening. But I promise you that if you take the opportunity to put a little extra effort into researching, you'll be amply rewarded. Platforms like JSTOR and Google provide resources, blah, blah, blah." But yeah, I thought it's a really good Substack piece because people talk a lot about Toni Morrison's language and understanding like what she's saying. I also personally find watching her interviews on YouTube, she has a lot of interviews with Charlie Rose on YouTube, specifically like after some of her books, her newer works became available. She's talked with Charlie Rose extensively about Beloved and The Bluest Eye. Watching those interviews and hearing what she has to say about her works is informative and helpful for me to understand her works, but also reading the books and listening to it on Audible or Libby at the same time is also really helpful for me. And the works outside of like Beloved and The Bluest Eye and Sula are often readily available on Libby to borrow while you read with your physical copy of the book. So, because hearing Toni read her books, her pacing, and hearing her say things and how she explains it makes it a much easier read for me. And I do speed it up a bit because Toni reads very slow. She's a slow reader, but it does help. And sometimes I did find myself slowing it down and going back and listening again because she writes with a lot of em dashes and commas. So hearing the paces, where she wants to pause, where she wants you to sit in the text and what she's trying to say is helpful. And I think that having that experience with her work will change the way that you approach it. And also try reading some of her nonfiction because it is a lot more on its nose and that she doesn't kind of like drop you in a story. I think that's one thing about her fiction. She does like, there's no introduction, there's no walking up to it. You are like, it's almost like you sink in the get out chair and she hits the cup and you're like there. And that is how Toni Morrison writes, but I personally love it. And so I think you just have to find your way in or accept that she just might not be for you. And that's okay too. If you don't like her work, everybody doesn't have to like Toni Morrison. But if you want to find a way in, I think you have to kind of do that. So the next thing I read was an article from Tim Barnacle. I think he wrote 1876 as well. So yeah, Broken Promise, which came out on May 7th, the end of the Voting Rights Act, it is effectively the end of the Voting Rights Act because the parts of the Voting Rights Act that are most enforceable have been substantially removed from the government at this point, Section 2 and Section 5. But it just talks about kind of LBJ and the promise he made and how that has been taken down by this current administration and president. I've talked about that ad nauseum, but I'm not going to go into that again. Also, Sherilyn's piece, SCOTUS drops the other shoe on the Voting Rights Act, kind of talks about that ad nauseum as well, and the impacts of like what it means, but also kind of like how we got there and what all these things, like the grand scheme and how all the pieces fit in together. So those three articles, 1876 kind of talks about it a bit too. It talks about Reconstruction. And this was like an older article that he reposted and I saw again. But 1876 is the last battle of what he calls the last battle of the Civil War, the closest election in the American history. And essentially what made it the last battle in the Civil War was they got the Union troops rather to leave the South and essentially let the breeding grounds for Jim Crow and the end of Reconstruction start, where the Southerners basically restored home rule and kicked Black folks out of the government, implemented the slave codes or the black codes and grandfather clauses and literacy tests, all of these things to make America rough and hard for Black people. Next, let's talk about one of my favorite pieces I read this month. You want shared power, but you're lazy and consistent. And Selfish by Zide. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Zide, if you see this. It actually was dropped in March. I found it in May. And she talked about kind of how people love the idea of community organizing and have critiques and thoughts and things to say about it without really being invested in the work. And I think I found myself feeling a little bit called out, if I'm honest, about this work, because I have been someone who's done community organized work before, but now that my actual work is a little bit different and I am in the legal field, I feel like a lot of
my community work and activism has kind of died down, and I don't do it as often or as much as I used to. With that said, I do think that she raises some good points about kind of how we have to stay thoughtful in the way we talk to people who are in the work and the way we show up. Because I think it's easier to throw the idea of help or to throw criticisms of the way that people are doing the work without understanding the real life implications of being present every day and or what the aid looks like when people need it in that moment. So yeah, I really enjoyed this piece. It was really good, thoughtful, like I said, and impactful, and a really good read. And then I read Dominique Morgan's piece called Same Systems, Different Language, about her decision to go into incarceration while she evaded sentencing. And Dominique she was released. And I read this piece a couple days after Dominique surrendered for surrender before the sentencing. And I thought the piece itself was super impactful. And it made me think about how the further you go down the sphere of supremacy in America, like when you go from white woman, black man, black woman, black gay person, black trans person, the further you go down the ladder of supremacy, the more the impact is. And the further you go down, and the more intersections happen and the more marginalized a person's identity is, the greater the impact that they will experience at the hands of the criminal justice system, which is supposed to be rehabilitative, but in more times than not, it is over punitive to Black women, to Black people, Black men, Black trans folks. And I think just hearing Dominique's story from what she shared on Substack, and also knowing how she's talked about her experience with the criminal penal system online in general, what's clear to me is that she has had a bad shake at survival crimes. And I think that the internet community itself has been hyperly responsive and hyperly critical of her. I think a lot of that has to do with just her identity in general. And she has never, and I say that because the way that she has responded to the criticisms has never been to deflect from the responsibility or the role in which some of the things that she did affected other people and its intersection or relationship with her identity. But more so, she has taken direct action, direct accountability for it a lot of times, and just said what the shit was flat out, but also addressing the ways that those systems have maybe infringed on or overlap with infringing behaviors or activities in her own personal life. So yeah, free Dominique, let her tell her story about what has happened to her and what's next for her. And then I read a piece called Black Excellence is Just the PR Department for Black Capitalism. And I am unlearning. I'm a part of the ex-Black excellence crowd. I'm learning how negative that is. And as someone who's deconstructing capitalism and deconstructing the role in which I play in upholding that system, because I think, a lot of us, especially those of us who are first gen, like I am, first gen lawyer, first gen college student, I think our parents aspire for us to be quote unquote Black excellence and aspire for us to thrive and succeed in that way. And what we associate with Black excellence, but learning that, nobody, if the only person that is winning or succeeding in life is me, then I'm not doing good for my community. And what good am I to the bloodline and the legacy of the family if I'm not making sure that all of us eat? And capitalism does not afford a system where everybody can eat. So learning that, but she was talking specifically about LeBron and Jay-Z and his kind of conversations about capitalism, and he did an interview recently, I think with GQ, and talking about how billionaires should be demonized, and yeah, just his capitulation with the NFL and selling out Colin Kaepernick and all of that. But nevertheless, great piece to read and check out. And then also, lastly, is Side Piece the new community? Is community the newest side hustle? Yes, because why the fuck is everything so expensive? Why am I paying $45 to sit with you in the goddamn park? I can sit in the park for free. Why am I paying for that? Like, everything is expensive. And I don't know if this is a problem as pervasive in the South and in the Midwest as it is, I feel like, on the East Coast and in the Mid-Atlantic, because community costs dollars and cents in DC. Like, if you want to do things, even if it's unrelated to alcohol or like things you traditionally associate with money, you're gonna have to run them pockets out here. I'm not gonna lie. Everything gonna be a goddamn posh ticket or a party full invite. Nothing's gonna be for the free ski or cheap around here. You gotta pay. You gotta pay the fee. You must pay the fee. And they want it all the time in blood. So yeah, she did a great piece about that. But yeah, check that out. And that's my wrap up of everything I have read and what I've read in the month of May. Like I said, I did not get to read a lot of books this month. And because of that, with that in mind, I'm going to be doing a lot more immersive reading during this month, because I want to read more books. Reading list for June. I'm not going to add anything else to it. I'm going to get through these 5 books. And I'll see y'all on the other side. Love and light. Holla. Peace.